Can I introduce you to the next keynote speaker, which is Dr Tina Pagett, the HMI from Ofsted, to introduce the new Ofsted and CQC SEND Local Area Inspection Framework, there's a mouthful, and talk about the Ofsted's annual report. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you very much. So currently I am the lead for SEND and alternative provision. I'm one of Ofsted's specialist advisors. But I am one of His Majesty's inspectors. I have always worked in education with young people with SEND, and I've also had a stint in a local authority and as principal of a specialist college, and also have a child with a disability. So, you know, that's sort of my career sort of summed up, really. What I'm leading on at the moment, as Tina has just said, is the new Area SEND framework, which launched late last year, and I believe we've got some people in the room that have had an experience of that already, because we've carried out our first 3 inspections of local area partnerships under the new framework. So I'm going to talk you through really around the changes from the Area SEM 1 inspection framework to the new framework, and really you're all going to play a key part in inspections, so help you to see the kind of differences and what to expect, and your role within that, and what really happens for a local area partnership after they've had an inspection. So in terms of that background, what's the difference between Area SEND 1 and Area SEND 2, the current framework? All the way back in May 2016, Ofsted and CQC were commissioned to introduce what was a one-off round of local area inspections, and it really was, which carried on right the way through, finished in April, and with inspections going right up with the revisits until December. And the aim of that initial inspection framework was to reassess how well local areas were implementing the reforms that were introduced by the Children and Families Act, and the extent to which they were meeting their responsibilities really towards children and young people. Oh, thank you, a reminder. I'm expecting it automatically to change. Okay. So why the changes then? In 2020, the DfE and DHSE commissioned Ofsted and CQC really to develop a new Area SEND inspection framework. So with an aim really of that it was a single cycle before the Area SEND 1 inspections. But so this was about a sort of broader inspection framework that was going to frequently check that effectiveness of local area partnership arrangements, and be able to recommend improvements for areas for those arrangements. The previous framework focused on education and health, and the new framework rightly includes social care as part of the inspection team and as part of the framework, and also in line with the SEND review, there's the inclusion of alternative provision as well as part of that. And the focus on that framework, which has taken a long time to develop collaboratively, is how well services are working to improve the experiences and outcomes for children and young people with SEND. So if we have a look at those changes for that framework. So it's a 5-year cycle now. It isn't that one-off inspection. And all areas can expect to receive a full inspection at least once in a 5-year period. So the frequency and type of inspection will depend on a number of different factors, which would include the previous inspection outcomes, the time since they were last visited or inspected, any information that we receive which may indicate that an inspection might need to take place sooner rather than later. That could come from other inspections in the area, or it could come from sort of intelligence in that area. And they'll be also scheduled around what other inspections are taking place, so that those local area partnerships are not suddenly besieged with a JTI, an ILACS and an area send inspection all within weeks of one another. So some of those key changes, as we've said, is that continuous cycle, focusing inspections more on the experiences of children and young people with SEND and their families. Strengthening our response when we have concerns by introducing those more frequent monitoring visits and perhaps an earlier re-inspection. Promoting the continuous improvement for all by asking local area partnerships to publish those action plans afterwards, so that we can see what they're going to do about what we found when we went in. And we've also added in that sort of, probably every sort of year, 18 months, an annual engagement conversation with those local area partners. So that's leaders going in and having a discussion about what's happening in the area and what progress they're making. We'll come back to a little bit more on that. So we could talk a little bit about the outcomes, because there are three possible judgments. And the consultation for the area SEND framework, I'm sure most of you contributed towards, and we've had a number of stakeholder groups that have been running for a long time. The area SEND framework, there were delays because of COVID, but what it did mean was that there was greater opportunity for people to come together to input into what that framework should look like, what it should focus on. But one of the concerns from the consultation were how local area partnerships are performing its statutory duties. So under the new framework, the team will gather evidence on how they are meeting their statutory duties, as well as how their strategic plans are making a difference in improving, and what they know about how it is improving the lives of children and young people, as well as their families. So informing those judgments, we'll look at the impact of the local area partnerships SEND arrangements on those experiences and outcomes, and also how local partnerships are working together to evaluate and develop the SEND system. So in terms of those three outcomes, a huge deliberation and input to what those outcomes look like. There are three. And the first one being that the local area partnerships SEND arrangements typically lead to positive experiences and outcomes for children and young people with SEND, and that the local area recognises and is taking action where improvements are needed. And where a local area partnership is judged with this first outcome, then they can expect a full inspection within 5 years, but they can expect to meet with Ofsted and CQC leaders regionally for those conversations regularly to look at their action plans and what they're doing to continue to make those improvements. The second outcome is where the local area partnership is judged in terms of their arrangements that are leading to inconsistent experiences and outcomes for children and young people, and that the local area partners must work jointly to make improvements. And so they will have an inspection within 3 years, along with those annual conversations to monitor the progress that they're making. And the final outcome are where widespread and or systemic failings that lead to significant concerns about the experiences and outcomes, and that the local area partnership must address those urgently. And in this case, they must publish a priority action plan. And the DFE and NHSE will work with them on this. They'll have a monitoring visit within 18 months and a full re-inspection within 3 years, along with those regular conversations with sort of regional leaders. We touched on alternative provision, and that features as part of the new framework. And this is how local authorities commission and oversee alternative provision. And there was really overwhelming support within the consultation for this to be included, particularly as so many children and young people in alternative provision have SEND and have EHCPs. But just to be clear, this is where the local authorities are commissioning that alternative provision. We recognise that many schools and providers commission provision themselves, and that will be picked up under the education inspection framework of those individual institutions. This is where local authorities are commissioning that alternative provision. I touched a little bit on those engagement meetings, but this is really where that sort of cycle of having those conversations where, you know, Ofsted and CQC will come together with leaders within that local area, and an opportunity really to sort of to be assured that the needs of children and young people in the area are being, you know, that services are improving, that their voices are being listened to, that leaders are acting on what they're hearing from children, young people and their families, and what it is, what issues are they facing, what challenges, what are they doing about it, what difference is it making. Part of the framework as well is thematic visits. So as part of those new arrangements, we will carry out some thematic visits. And that will really be where we can go in and investigate a specific aspect of SEND that is causing sort of concern, that we're hearing that back through our reports, and, you know, we want an opportunity to look into that a little bit more and share the findings. So there isn't any published reports for that, but an annual report that will talk to you about the findings from those thematic visits. The first one being alternative provision, because we haven't got that learning from those inspections yet. We've literally just started them. So focusing in on alternative provision. So we will, as I said, visit a range of local areas and you know, specifically focus in on that with an annual report. Although we'll give feedback to those local areas so that they can learn from that as well. So really, from your perspective, I thought it was important to focus on what you can expect and the role that you play in that, and you know, and obviously that is a you know, an absolute vital role. So it's important to say that the old framework has finished, and so you know, there are no more revisits under that old framework. You'll be familiar with written statement of actions, and you know, the DFE and NHSE will continue to work with those local areas on those that have written statement of actions, and they'll form an important part of that sort of evaluation for the inspection teams. They will look at that when they go in. It may well be that local areas are prioritised where they have a written statement of action, but there are lots of sort of factors for scheduling those first inspections. In terms of that inspection process, it's a 3-week inspection. These are big inspections, and they are complex in terms of bringing together social care, education through Ofsted and CQC. So, you know, they are complex in bringing all of those different remits together, and rightly so. The first 2 weeks, and I'll talk you through a little bit more in detail, but the first 2 weeks are off-site, and that's that sort of preparation and evidence gathering and talking with families, children, young young people, practitioners, reviewing evidence to really get those key lines of inquiry, to get to know those local areas before we go in for that third week, which is on site. So as I've said, it is bringing together those three remits, which does bring complications, but it really is about bringing that expertise together so that we can really interrogate that evidence base when we are both off-site and on-site as part of the process. The published framework, Annex A, is a really important part of the framework, and it's really clear from there what it is that we expect to see, the information that we're going to expect to see. So it won't be a surprise for local area partnerships that they're going to be expected to share this information, and that's around its strategy and commissioning arrangements, obviously that person level data, so that we can use that to select, children and young people, so that we can look at their experiences, and also the full range of services and providers that we need to be part of the inspection. So in terms of gathering that evidence, as I said, that first week, it's about notifying the area and giving them that opportunity to start to plan the inspection with us, sharing that draft timetable, and most importantly, getting that information so that of all children and young people in the area that have SEND needs and EHCPs, so that we can select 6 young people and children that will form part of that core tracking, which I'll come on to a little bit more, but also about getting the surveys out, early dissemination of the surveys. I'll touch a little bit more on surveys in a minute, but that's key for us to hear back from everybody in the area. So for week 2 off-site, it's around holding those tracking meetings with the 6 selected children, young people, to help inspectors really establish those lines of inquiry before they go on site, and going through talking to those parents, talking to those children and the practitioners with them. From sort of your perspective, you'll be very much part of those discussions in that off-site week, meeting with leaders, meeting with yourselves as part of that, meeting with Sendias to discuss your role in the partnership, how you're involved in co-production, and again, we'll share those emerging lines of inquiry with you at that stage, so that we can be judging with you whether or not we're getting that right, whether we're missing something, whether the evidence we've got so far is not giving us perhaps the right steer on what we should be looking at when we come on to the final on-site week of the inspection. So gathering evidence directly, those tracking meetings, that's with those 6 young people that we've talked about. The framework is really, really clear that those 6 cases represent 4 main areas of need, and will include 2 that are receiving SEN support, 1 that's in alternative provision, and those that have EHCPs. And some of the questions that we get around 6 out of a local area doesn't seem to be a huge amount, but you'll see when I move on to the next bit that it is much broader than that. But actually, through that consultation phase and through the extensive pilot phases, to be able to really get that full understanding of that lived experience, 6 young people looking, at their journeys that they're on, is really, really valuable, and also obviously absolutely time consuming. We talked a little bit about the surveys, and those surveys have been co-produced and changed with so much input to them. There are 3 surveys, all have things like videos, easy read versions, audio recordings, introductions, so that they can be as accessible as possible. So that's for children, young people, parents, carers, and also local area partnership staff as well. Local areas will get a version that they can adapt as well into whichever format that particular area needs, they'll know best about that. But we don't really want paper versions going out, where we've seen that in pilots, families receiving paper versions and then being able to turn them around and post them back is not giving us that information we need. So, but local areas will get them. But you're going to play a significant role in making sure that those surveys get out to as far and wide as possible. So as I said, that on-site week 3 is where we'll carry out, a broad range of activities that will go beyond the 6 young people that we're using as part of that tracking. So sampling visits, we'll be visiting providers. I'll show you an example in a minute of what that looks like. Providers, schools, colleges, they always think we're there to inspect them. We're really not. It's really about, their role and the role that they're playing, and also to be able to focus in on children and young people that are in their schools, in the special schools, in colleges, and to be able to expand on the experiences of those 6 young people that we're looking at, children and young people that we're looking at. We'll have a broad range of discussions with different groups and leaders, and obviously that that evidence base that we've been collecting as we go along, and sort of start to really focus on that decision-making process that local areas are using in making decisions about children and young people. So to fully understand the experiences and outcomes, it's vital that we're having those discussions with children and young people, that we're talking to parents and carers in lots of different ways, and that we're also obviously getting that opportunity to meet with different leaders and share what we're finding and give them that opportunity to point us in the direction of other evidence. So along with that case tracking, I talked about focus sampling, and what we mean by focus sampling is things like looking at the quality of EHCPs, and there's a lot of time spent looking at that. What about the fair access protocols, looking at the dynamic support register? So it's that sort of sampling different areas, and that's absolutely key to the decisions that are being made about children and young people. And in terms of reviewing the local area's oversight for those cohorts, so we will look at things like high rates of attendance, those that are educated other than at school, home educated, those known to youth justice, so that we're focusing in on those key groups and looking at their experiences as well. In terms of sampling visits, that's where we get that opportunity to go out and visit not just providers. In education, we'll be going to special schools, nurseries, colleges, alternative provision settings, and also specialist services. For health, they'll look at the assessment stage, intervention, transition stages of health support, looking at universal, targeted and specialist health teams, speech and language therapy services, for example, children and young people's mental health services. And for social care, they'll be looking again at that assessment, identification, intervention and transition stages for social care support. So looking at the disabled children's team, meeting with them, early intervention support, adult social care, so that we're gathering from those 3 areas, pulling that evidence together to support what we've already been finding. From that alternative provision perspective, we will go in to visit alternative providers in the area, those that are commissioned by the local authority, but we will also be looking at those sort of EHCPs, the fair access protocols and panels, where those decisions are being made, what are the plans for those children and young people in terms of reintegrating them into mainstream, or moving them on through onto their next stage, for instance, into college. So there will be a specific focus on alternative provision as well. So in terms of the wider partnership, this slide is just really sort of showing that sort of breadth of the partnership that we're looking at. Yes, we are obviously looking at what the local authority are doing, but there are key players for that wider area partnership, and this is recognising how people work together and the need for everybody to be involved in a local area SEND inspection to give us a really clear picture of what's happening. And that sort of on-site, off-site inspection activity will be gathering, a really diverse range of evidence through those meetings, through the case tracking, through sampling visits, and those various sampling activities as well. And you'll be asked to attend, where possible, meetings face-to-face. There will be online meetings as well. The pilots have shown that where we do a mixed, today you're doing a hybrid model of online and face-to-face, but when we're gathering that evidence base, it's one or the other we found that works the best, rather than having people sort of in and outside of the meetings. But that combined with those surveys is all around that gathering that evidence that really is focusing on experiences and outcomes. And this is just a sort of example, really, of what on-site activity might look like as part of there's a very consistent schedule, although things obviously vary from different partnerships. But the focus sampling we talked about, we could have inspectors that are meeting with leaders that are responsible for those that are educated other than at school. In terms of tracking, of those 6 identified children and young people, we might be meeting with the practitioners to support the evidence we've already gathered by talking to families and talking to the young people themselves. We would definitely be meeting with Parent Carer Forum and other parent groups so that we can discuss co-production, but also the experiences from your perspective. Sampling visits, as I said, we're going into a special school, we're going into mainstream primary or going into secondary schools, we're going to colleges, and that sampling here on this particular day, looking at that dynamic support register. So that's just to give you a little taste of what a day on inspection might look like. So in terms of what happens after inspection, we've got a few minutes. So we've changed the way the reports look, and that's by listening through that consultation phase, really. In Area SEN 1, a letter, sometimes shorter, sometimes incredibly lengthy, went to that local area partnership. And we found that it wasn't really giving families, children and young people a real clear idea of how well that local authority is doing or what it is they need to do better. So most of you will be familiar with school reports, college reports, and so we've adopted more of that style, and that's come very, very clearly through the consultation. So those reports that will come out very much look at what it's like to be a child or young person in that area from their perspective, what a local area partnership is doing well, what it's doing that they're not doing quite as well, and also what they need to do to improve the experiences and outcomes. So, that's the sort of format that is more familiar to most of us through school. So, and obviously also in a more timely way. Some of the reports were taking a long time, and you were aware that Ofsted had been in with CQC, but you were waiting a long time to see what that outcome was, and more importantly what the local area was going to do to make improvements. After the report is published, we asked the local area to publish an updated strategic plan so that the actions and recommendations are really clear in there, and you know what it is that they are going to do about it, and in your roles are able to obviously be involved in that, but also to potentially challenge that. And we've said where a local area partnership is found to have widespread or systemic failings or weaknesses, they do need to submit a separate action plan, and this priority action plan replaces that written statement of action that you'll already be familiar with. And that's really them saying, you know, these are the actions from the reports that we know that we need to do something about, and do something about quickly. So that will be, they submit to Ofsted within 30 days of the published report, and then publish that widely when they've had a chance to review that and agree that plan. And in terms of the role that DFE and NHSE play in terms of their support and challenge, that continues. And, you know, they will know the local areas that have a written statement of action previously, or will have that priority action plan, and they will continue to go in and put that support and challenge in place for them. And that level of support and challenge will vary under this new framework in terms of, you know, which outcome that local area has, in terms of whether it's positive experience and outcomes, inconsistent, or whether there are widespread or systemic failings. And in the meantime, you know, local areas where they've got that accelerated progress plan or written statement of action, you know, the NHS and DFE officers will continue to work with local areas until they are re-inspected under the new framework to put that support and challenge in place. So I think with a minute to spare, that's the new Area Send framework, and a little bit about your role to play in that. So I will see you for the questions a little bit later.
Thank you, Tina. I think that's answered quite a lot of questions around the new inspection framework, so thank you for that.